ACS, the private pilot ACS is on airworthiness requirements. So on this slide here, I have the actual table from the ACS. So we got, brought this out from the ACS and just added a few numbers to help, make your life a lot easier when you're studying. So these numbers that you see here in the different colors, they're basically are references to the topics that you really need to know in order to satisfactorily pass this task right here for airworthiness requirements. So the main thing we're basically going to be going over in this program is, to cover the specific things, because in a lot of these cases the references have a lot of information, so it's going to be really hard for you as a new pilot to just be studying that information on your own, especially if you're like in an accelerator program. So we basically created this program to help you focus on the important things you really need to know, and also to make your life a lot easier. So with that being said, you do not want to just focus on rote memorization of all these concepts we have in this program. You also, on your free time, you also want to go deeper and study most of these regulations word for word in the actual book. That's the idea. So with the ACS, is basically divided into knowledge areas, risk management, and skills, and we'll be covering each one in depth in this program. So that's one of the advantages of the program. We're going to start from knowledge area 1, which basically talks about general airworthiness requirements for airplanes. And the first thing we're going to talk about is the location of the certificates, basically. So on the left side here, you see a picture of what a standard airworthiness certificate looks like. So this must always be visible in the cockpit. So the airworthiness certificate is basically a certificate that the FAA issues all owners of aircraft to let them know that the aircraft is actually airworthy, and it does not expire. So we'll talk about this in more details in slides to come. So you do have to follow certain conditions in order to make sure your airworthiness certificate is still valid. Then the other thing you need to have is a US registration certificate. So your US registration certificate, it used to be valid for 3 years, but now it expires every 7 years. So it's important for you to know that information leading up to your test. And to operate an airplane in the US, you also need to have an airplane flight manual or a pilot operating handbook. It must be in the cockpit of the aircraft. So throughout this program, you'll hear me calling, or you hear me saying a POH or airplane flight manual. I'm basically referring to the pilot's operating handbook. So you as a student pilot, you really need to familiarize yourself with this book, because it has a lot of information you need to know with regards to your aircraft. And the next one we'll talk about is the required inspections. So the required inspections is covered on part 91.409 of the Code of Federal Regulations. You must basically comply with the aircraft airworthiness certificates to actually remain valid. So if you follow all these inspections, it means your aircraft is actually airworthy. The first inspection you really need to know about is the annual inspection, and this must be completed every 12 months. And then the second one is a 100-hour inspection. So your 100-hour inspection is basically based on the engine hours of the aircraft. So if you're training, you probably already heard of your takt time and your hops time. So you really want to pay attention to, the flight school probably charges you by the hops time, but it's important for you to know the takt time is what they use to track the 100-hour inspection. So this is basically required if your aircraft is used for rental. So if you own like a personal aircraft, you really do not need to do a 100-hour inspection. You only really need to comply with the annual inspections. But if your aircraft is for, if you're a flight instructor, or if you're using your aircraft for rental, you do need to make sure you complete that 100-hour inspection, 100 hours that the engine has been ran for. That's the idea. And you must keep record of all the inspections in an airplane maintenance logbook. So your airplane, just like how your pilot, you have a logbook, the airplanes also have a maintenance logbook where they log all these inspections. And we'll be going into more details shortly. The Pilot Ground Bridge program is, a program that's there to help aviation enthusiasts or student pilots, sharpen up their knowledge. But I just know if you do purchase this course, you're helping somebody out there successfully become a pilot. So with that being said, I'll just show you how you can get access to the course. And I'll come in here. If you do come here to this page on this link here, We currently have it on the Teachable platforms, but if you do come to the page here right now, you can scroll down to where it says to choose a pricing option. And we currently have the course going for 199. So like I said before, if you do purchase, just know you're helping somebody else become a pilot, and you'll also be getting access to great content that's going to help you sharpen your aviation knowledge. So I look forward to seeing you in the course if you do purchase. And in the meantime, we'll go back and focus on the content. There's more inspections here that you need to be aware of. So part 91.411, part 91.413, part 91.207. You could study those on your free time. I'll just highlight most of the important inspections you need to be aware of here. You need to inspect the altimeter system. This must be done every 24 months. And you also need to inspect the static pressure system as well. And also there's a transponder inspection you need to do every 24 calendar months. And there's also ELT inspections you need to complete. The ELT inspections need to be done every 12 months. And the batteries must be replaced after 1 hour of cumulative use or after half of the battery useful life is expired. So the ELT is basically the emergency location transmitter. Basically, if in case of emergencies, if you arm the ELT, you can use that to locate where the aircraft is. So moving on here, I'll talk about airworthiness directives. So the airworthiness directives is another certificate, or the airworthiness, I should say, is it's another set of information that tells us about defects that may be in the aircraft that we need to pay attention to. Yeah, basically the FAA basically issues the airworthiness when there's an unsafe condition in an aircraft. If the condition is most likely to get bad over time, they typically issue a AD, which is the airworthiness directive, to let you know, okay, you need to comply with this AD by so time. So that's the general idea. So there's basically two major types of ADs. They're recurring and non-recurring. So recurring AD is basically an AD that with specific time or deadlines. So for example, they may say you need to replace a specific part for every 100 hour, 500 hour or more. And on the other hand, a non-recurring AD is just an AD they issue one time. That's just done. Once they issue it and you comply with it that one time they tell you to comply, that's done forever. You really don't have to do anything anymore. So that's the idea. So you want to think about the ADs like a car recall, sort of. That's the idea with the ADs. Well, we'll go into a little bit more details later on, but this is a general idea I want you to have when you think about airworthiness directives. So you really need to comply with them in order for the aircraft airworthiness certificate to actually remain valid. So with all the items I've listed in the past couple of slides. So to recap everything I was talking about in the last couple of slides, I want you to remember the acronym AVIATE. That's AVIATE. So in order to keep the airworthiness certificate valid, just remember to aviate. It basically highlights everything we were talking about in the last couple of slides. So the A is for the ADs, and we already know by now we have a recurring ADs and the non-recurring ADs, and the V is for your VOR inspections. So you need to complete VOR inspections every 30 days if you're conducting IFR operations. And the I is for your inspections, which was the very first thing we talked about, the annual inspections and the 100-hour inspections. And then the A is for your altimeter and static system inspections. That has to be done every 24 months. And then the T is for your transponder, has to be done every 24 calendar months. And then the E is for your ELT, which has to be done every 12 months, or if half of the battery's useful life has expired, or after 1 hour of cumulative use. So I just want you to, remember this acronym as much as you can, because it's going to help you down the line. It will help demystify or even, help you recall all these concepts a lot easily. So I'll move on to the next item here we need to talk about with regards to, making sure the aircraft is airworthy, which is the special flight permit. So special flight permit, if you need to read more, you can go to part 21.197. It has a lot of details about special flight permit. But a special flight permit may be issued for an aircraft that may not currently meet applicable airworthiness requirements, but is capable of safe flight, or a list of purposes which is listed down here. So mind you, here in the slides we don't have everything here listed. I just gave a few examples in this slide. So to see the full breadth of the content or the circumstances that may require you to obtain a special flight permit, please make sure you read the regulations, but I'll just go over the few we have here. So for example, if the aircraft is to be flown to a base where the repairs are going to be made, or where you're going to store the aircraft, you can obtain a special flight permit in this situation. Or if you're delivering or exporting the aircraft. Also, if you're evacuating the aircraft from areas of impending danger, you can obtain a special flight permit for this purpose. We talked about the reasons for obtaining a special flight permit, but how do you obtain this special flight permit? So in order to actually obtain one, you need to contact your local flight standards district office. It's called the FSDO, as the FSDO. So you need to apply in order to obtain one. So I just put a scenario here just to help us think about the different scenarios where you may need to obtain a special flight permit. The scenario basically says the airplane is close to its routine 100-hour inspection that we talked about earlier, and flying to an A&P mechanic will go over the 100-hour mark. So is a special flight permit needed to fly to the repair shop? So as you can see, this is almost related to the very first reason I talked about, flying the aircraft to a base where repairs need to be made. So in your check ride, you may not get this specific question. That's why I advise, you go to part 21.197 and, try to see if during your check ride there's anything related to, depending on the scenario the examiner gives you, there's anything related to that in the regulation, you'll be able to use that to answer your question successfully. And then now we move into knowledge areas 2 and 3. So knowledge areas 2 and 3 basically covers pilot performed preventive maintenance and the equipment required for day and night VFR flights. So the major thing we're really going to focus on in this area is basically the equipments that are required for day and night VFR flights, because those are the most important items that you really need to be aware of. So with that being said, you do not want to totally ignore the pilot perform preventive maintenance, but that is basically just there, to let you know there's some maintenance items you can, do on the aircraft yourself as a pilot. You probably don't have to take to a mechanic. So you need to, study up on that as well and understand the concepts related with that. The equipment required for VFR day and night equipment are covered in part 91.205. So this is basically like, I like to think about this as like almost equivalent of like the 10 commandments of like a private pilot. You really need to know this regulation right here. So it basically lists all the equipment that you need to know in order to fly VFR day and night. So there's this acronym here that can help you remember all this equipment. So it's called A tomato flames. So the A basically tells you your airspeed indicator. It's one of those equipments that's required for VFR day. The T is for the tachometer. Tachometer is basically what helps you measure the engine hours that we use for the 100-hour inspection. And then the O is for all pressure gauge. The M is for your manifold pressure gauge. A is for your altimeter. The T is for your temperature gauge for each liquid cooled engine. O is for your all temperature gauge for each air-cooled engine. Then E is for the ELT, your emergency location transmitter. F is for your fuel gauge. L is for your landing gear position indicator. A is for your anti-collision lights. M is for your magnetic compass. E is for your emergency equipment. For example, flotation gear or like a pyrotechnic signaling device. And there's a star here. Just remember, for the emergency equipment, it's typically if you're operating for higher over water and beyond power of gliding distance from the shore, that's when this item is required. And the S is for a seatbelt. And then the next thing you need to remember is the VFR night equipment. So your VFR, basically your visual flight rules, which is most likely what you'll be training for the most part when you're going for your private pilot certificate. You could fly VFR day or VFR night. So for the VFR night portion, just remember the memory aid flaps. So you need all the VFR day equipment, which is the 8 tomato flames we talked about here, and flaps, in order for you to actually understand all the equipment you need to fly at night. So the F from the flaps is for your fuses. L is for your landing light, A is for your anti-collision lights, P is for your position light, and the S is for your sources of electrical energy. So basically, if any of this equipment is not working at any point in time, you really cannot conduct a VFR day or night flight, depending on the circumstances. So if you're flying VFR day, for example, if an equipment from VFR night is not working, you really don't need that to work during the day. So you can still go fly VFR day. Obviously, you want to use some caution, but that's the general idea. But for VFR night, you need both VFR day and VFR night equipment. equipment. So you could get scenarios that you would need to really know this regulation off the top of your head. You know, if you use this memory aid, you can easily write it down on a sheet of paper and just write everything out. Or just go to the specific regulation part 91.205. You're typically allowed to look at your 𝒅𝒐𝒏𝒕, which is the book that has the regulations. Allowed to look at that during the test, but obviously, you know, if you memorize this, it's a lot easier to, you know, just write it down and actually show your examiner, you know, what you're doing, compared to, you know, looking at the book every time during the test. So that's not, it's not going to be a good look. But if you're stuck, obviously that's something you can do. So the next thing we'll look at here is part 91.213. So part 91.213 deals with, you know, flying with, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment. So this is a very, very important portion of the whole general airworthiness topic we're talking about. So the most important concept, or one of the most important concepts you need to be aware of in here, is the minimum equipment list, which is a MEL. So MEL is basically a precise listing of instruments, equipment, and procedures that allow an aircraft to be operated under specific conditions with, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment. So the general idea is basically it's a document or publication that is put out there for you to know, okay, if an instrument or equipment is not working, you can still fly the aircraft. So we do not have one in a flight school. Typically with the aircrafts we fly, like in the Cessna 172s, we typically do not have MELs. So this is a very, very important concept for you to grasp. And then the next thing we'll talk about is how to determine if you can fly with an, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment, because the only thing that can really tell you if you can fly with, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment is a MEL, but we do not have one. So we need a sort of process to determine how we can fly with an, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment. And on the next slide, this is what I'm going to be talking about. So this is going to be covered in 91.213D, which I will show you on the chart here. So this flow chart is basically highlighting 91.213D. Like I mentioned earlier, is the D section of part 91.213. So if you do not have a MEL, how do you determine if you can fly an aircraft with an, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment? So this flow chart here basically just gives you, summarizes the whole process. So if you go read the 𝒅𝒐𝒏𝒕, you know, it's a lot of words. If you look at this flow chart, it kind of like puts everything together to make it really easy to understand. You can think about first what you want to like consider. So we'll start here. If something is not working and equipment on the aircraft is broken, first you need to ask yourself, does the aircraft have an MEL? So if the aircraft has an MEL, obviously just follow whatever the MEL says, because the MEL tells you, you know, gives you instructions and a list you can follow to determine, you know, if you can still fly the aircraft or not. But in our case, we really do not have a MEL, so we're a no. So we pretty much want to like come to this whole section here and ask ourselves these questions and determine if we can fly or not fly as applicable, obviously. So the first thing you want to do, and this is really in no specific order, but you know, this is a general idea. You want to determine if that, you know, 𝒐𝒕𝒊 equipment is required by the 𝒍𝒊 type certificate of the aircraft. Typically, every aircraft has a 𝒍𝒊 type certificate. It's published with the FAA as well, so you can, you could type FAA VFR day type certificate, and just search on their website for the specific aircraft you're using to see the actual VFR day type certificate. So you want to look at this document and determine if the broken equipment is in this document. If it's in there, it means you cannot fly. But if it's not in there, then you also want to like go on and check another reference item. So the next thing you need to look is it required by the kinds of operation equipment list? The kinds of operation equipment list is the KOEL. It's basically located in the POH, the limitations section for some airplanes. And some airplanes typically do not have a KOEL. Some do have what you call a comprehensive equipment list, but this is a kinds of operation equipment list. And on the next slide, I'll be going into more details on what the KOEL is. But if the broken equipment, if you find that in here, then you cannot fly. But if you don't, then you want to check 91.205. So 91.205 was what I talked about previously. The equipment required for day and night VFR flight, which is our atomator flames and flaps for VFR night. In that grab card here, you see I put this is another acronym we use for equipment required for IFR flights. So you probably haven't, seen this, but when you start your instrument rating, this is the acronym we use to remember the equipment required for IFR flights. So if it's not required by 91.205, for example, just go into the airworthiness directives and see if it's required by the airworthiness directives. But if it is in here, 91205, like we've seen earlier, has a lot of equipments listed, then we cannot fly. So we'll move on to check the airworthiness directives. If it's there, you really can fly. We also already talked about the airworthiness directives. But if it's not required by the airworthiness directives, then pretty much a no for everything in here. So what you want to do is basically just remove the equipment. You want to deactivate the equipment and placard it inoperative. So we'll talk about what a placard is in a little bit, but the idea is as long as it's safe to actually fly the aircraft, which is the final step here, you know, you could determine this by yourself or with the help of a mechanic. You can actually go and fly. But obviously, if it's not safe to fly, then you do not want to fly. So this is the general idea for, you know, determining how you can fly with an inoperative equipment. So I want you to, you know, just try to review this a few more times if you feel like it's a little bit complex for you to understand, because one thing I can guarantee you is on your checkride, it will most likely have a question with regards to inoperative equipment. And you need to be able to, you know, go through this whole process to determine if, you know, you can actually go fly or not. If you don't do it correctly, you know, it's going to be a problem. But hopefully you watch this video and, you know, you actually pass that question on your check ride. So moving on here, we'll talk about that.